What about JBL?
No.
Yeah, that was your cue to say something?
Yes.
Formula One is heading back to Imola for round 7 of the 2025 season. The Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, will spare you the full name, for what could be its final appearance on the F1 calendar. Is that a good thing? Are we saying goodbye to a track like this? Or is F1 in danger of losing its heritage? Highlighted by the fact that today is the 70th anniversary of the first World Championship for Drivers race at Silverstone. Joining me in the studio to preview Imola this weekend is Jake Boxall-Legge. Jake, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Looking forward to getting stuck in.
Yes, excellent. I know you've been racing Imola on an old computer game recently, so that's quite cool.
Yes.
So you've got lots of tips.
Yeah, the original F1 game. Don't know about the chicane that is no longer there, so we'll have to circle around it.
Yeah, I quite like the old chicane. But anyway, and joining us from around the F1 world, well, actually, they're quite close to each other, really. But first of all, out at the Silverstone Museum is Stuart Codling, surrounded by some very cool machinery. How are you doing, Stuart?
Fabulous, thank you. Yeah, I'm standing in front of an ex-David Coulthard 2000 McLaren, as driven by him to victory here at Silverstone in 2000. Behind me, in the background, the unmistakable profile of a Lotus 72, a car which, giving away my age here, won the World Championship in the year I was born, and I had a little dinky car of it. So very pleased to see that car up close.
Excellent, excellent. But actually matching you in terms of fever for the machinery behind him is Ben Hunt from the Williams HQ in Grove. Ben, how are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm having a good time here, actually. Check this out. Nelson Piquet's car, and behind me here, you can't actually see it. Probably, Kev, more suited to you. Jason Plato's Laguna between 95 and 99.
That's very cool. Yeah, the Williams-built Renault Laguna. We could go on from a tangent very quickly here, so we should probably move on to looking at this weekend at Imola. So it's Jake. It's the last of the current deal for Imola, and it looks like it won't be renewed. Is that a shame, or is it time for F1 to move on from Imola?
I think to a certain degree it is a bit of a shame, because as a circuit it's one that I really love. I got to go there for the first time last year, and it's just such a special place. It's right next to a kind of municipal town. You drive right under the circuit and there's sort of like old buildings and houses and that kind of thing. It sort of feels very much enveloped by the town of Imola itself. And it is just, it's got such a lovely flow to it as a circuit. But unfortunately, F1's metrics are about the excitement at a race. And is it really racing if there's not really an opportunity for cars to overtake each other? You might argue yes, but at the same time, I don't think it is. There's got to be that sort of perception of that you can do it, that you should be able to go and make that overtake. And unfortunately, I don't think you can anymore. These cars are way too wide for the circuit.
I was just going to say, Stuart, the cars behind you could probably race around Imola. They're much smaller and narrow. But do you think that's the problem with Imola now, is that really the track hasn't grown, but the cars have?
Well, yes and no. I think a considerable part of the problem today is that the ground effect cars so stiffly sprung they can't ride curbs, and at Imola you find lap time by riding the curbs. So as I think I wrote in our writer's opinion piece that was published today or yesterday on the website, we are paying the best drivers in the world to use their considerable skills to not go anywhere near curbs. So not great. I think even cars of this generation behind me, probably a little too wide. I don't think the F1 races have ever been brilliant at Imola. The cars on the other side of our little camera, probably a little bit better. Niki Lauda's BRM P160, would have liked to have seen that race at Imola. So yeah, I think it's been a circuit out of time for quite a while, but is it a shame to see the classic drivers' circuits go? Maybe. I mean, I'm not like Bahrain fanboy Oleg Karpov, who no doubt annoyed all the people below the line by saying Bahrain was a better circuit for racing than Imola in our writer's opinion piece. But yeah, certainly it's maybe time to consider other venues.
Ben, he's probably right though, isn't he? How do you feel about Imola going?
Yeah, I think it's much more from a logistic logistical point of view, in the sense that Formula One has outgrown the circuit. It's not so much about the cars, but it's about everything now that travels with Formula One, the hospitality, the engineering trucks, everything that comes with Formula One, including the bigger crowds, means that Imola's just too small. Setups too small, press rooms too small, paddocks too small. Basically, Formula One has outgrown the venue. I think that's probably the biggest problem for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Well, let's look ahead to the weekend anyway. McLaren dominated proceedings last time out in Miami with 1-2s in both the sprint and the Grand Prix. The latter, of course, beating George Russell's Mercedes by over half a minute. And Oscar Piastri is now leading the championship. So, Jake, do we think that McLaren go in as favourites, surely? Is that the case for all the races at the moment?
I think so, but it's going to be all about what they do in qualifying, because for the reasons that we've just discussed, it is very, very difficult to make that pass. As we saw with Max Verstappen and Lando Norris last year, there was sort of that interlude, and then towards the end of the race, Norris was catching, but maybe he wasn't close enough. The effect of dirty air pretty heavy, but equally, I don't see where there would have been the opportunity for him there. McLaren has made a little bit of a hash of qualifying, let's say. It's been very hit or miss in the last few races. And if Imola is the way it is, then ultimately you've got to maximise what you do in qualifying, or otherwise you're going to have to rely on strategy, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But you don't want to have to rely on that. You want to be able to dictate the race at your pace. You can't just go, well, you know what, we've lost, we've not got the lead, let's just do our own thing. You can't always rely on that.
Stuart, that's a real key point, isn't it? Is that McLaren's and Lando Norris in particular have struggled to really nail it in qualifying. So who's under more pressure going in? Oscar Piastri as the championship leader, or Norris now really with that string of small, not big errors, but enough that it's made the difference across the weekends?
Well, yeah, and it's the small errors that are proving really costly, aren't they? And it seems to be that the McLaren is a car that doesn't give you a yellow card before it bites, and Lando's finding that very hard to deal with. So these small errors tend to snowball as he chases his losses through the lap. And the gap at the front is actually quite small, particularly in qualifying. It's really in race pace that the McLaren really shows its hand. The trouble is, if you're behind on a circuit where you can't really overtake, and the longevity of the current generation of tyres means that you're stuck in a one-stop race, there's not really any options to get the go forward.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, Ben. Jake mentioned the strategy there. We saw at Suzuka when Max Verstappen was able to out-qualify both McLarens. He had track position. I would argue the McLaren strategy was a little bit conservative, perhaps, in doing the same thing basically with both cars. So if we're in a similar situation at Imola, do you think McLaren will be bolder, or do you think they'll stick to their, well, we're looking after Constructors' Championship and second and third is good, thanks very much?
No, I think it's the latter. I think at this early stage in the season, 6 races gone, I think it's still too early to back one driver over another. And I think McLaren are still finding their way in this position of being out in front. We spoke a lot last year about learning from the mistakes the previous year. Now it's consolidating and making sure that they don't ruin both drivers' races by making a bad decision when it comes to strategy. So I think that they will still be cautious. I think that that's probably the right approach at this early stage in the season, just to ensure that there's maximum points coming home for the team. That, for me, seems the most sensible thing to do. It may cause a bit of a headache for the team to manage, but I think that ultimately is probably the safest choice for them.
Oh, that's sensible. It's boring though, isn't it? If I was one of the drivers, I'd want to go, right, we're doing something different. I don't care. Here we go. But anyway, we'll see.
Well, this is the thing where it will be interesting to see if Lando Norris takes matters into his own hands again, like we saw obviously in Budapest, where he was obviously asked to give that position back to Piastri. Could we find this scenario now where one driver's a little bit more hesitant and won't roll over and follow the team instruction? Because ultimately the team orders may be conservative, but you didn't ask, will the drivers play ball? And that's the other element.
And of course this is important, Jake, because Max Verstappen actually isn't all that far. Actually, neither is George Russell at the moment, but Verstappen's not far behind. Now, you've done the cover feature for the latest Autosport magazine, the June issue, where you basically looked at the kind of Schrodinger's Red Bull of they're kind of in trouble, but they're also in the title fight. So where do we think, are they going to be getting stronger, or are they still in a bit of turmoil, do you think?
I think the team kind of understands where its key issues kind of lie, but there is this issue that means that it might not necessarily be compatible with Imola, in that it's still not particularly good at riding curbs or anything like that. It still struggles in slow speed areas. It's not a circuit that you would look at and say this plays to Red Bull's strengths, because it's not got a plethora of kind of those high speed, longer radius corners either, which is where it was very, very strong in Miami, which is why it was so good in Suzuka. Imola's a little bit more stop-start in that regard. It's still got a nice flow. It should still be good in Piratella, first part of Acqua Minerale, but the rest of the circuit, it might struggle a little bit. So you can never discount Max Verstappen, and we saw this last year. Again, we were expecting him to struggle a little bit, and he did struggle throughout the weekend, but then he got it into a place by qualifying where the car was very, very good, and Red Bull got the pole. So I still expect him to be in the hunt. I don't think you can ever rule him out until, we get to a point in the weekend where Red Bull maybe just isn't at the races.
Well, we'll see where Red Bull slot in and whether Verstappen can pull off another sort of miracle at Imola. But Ben, we've got to talk about the other multiple world champion, or one of the other multiple world champions on the grid. Lewis Hamilton has remained confident about Ferrari long term, but has expressed concern that they've lost a bit of performance since his sprint win in China. There was a bit of an embarrassing Miami radio meltdown, wasn't there? So where are Ferrari at the moment? They're coming back to Italy. They're not really in the hunt unless they've got a pretty major turnaround in fortunes, surely.
Yeah, I think the pressure's on there, isn't it, with Fred Vasseur there leading the team. Things clearly haven't gone to plan. I think that sprint win for Hamilton in China was a bit of a false dawn, and it gave everyone in the team a bit of a lift. Maybe our problems aren't as bad as we first feared. But, we've seen since then there has been a lot of frustration, not just, I would say, with Hamilton's car, but also Leclerc as well. Two drivers that are unhappy, not making the progress which they were obviously assured of when they signed their contracts and came into this season, because they were such a head of steam. Everyone was looking at that driver lineup and being sort of, very buoyed by it and thinking that maybe they could crash the championship fight, but clearly that's not gone to plan. A little bit of frustrations. I think the issue with Hamilton and the radio messages, that's just the relationship building. I think that any relationship between a driver and his race engineer takes a little while to establish and figure out, and I guess that's what it's doing. It's just playing it out in front of all of us, and we're seeing all the frustrations and emotions coming out. But that said, I go back to what I said at the start. I think the pressure is generally building now within Ferrari. People want to see progress and momentum, and that's something which they haven't delivered in the first couple of races.
But they also showed a bit of reluctance to swap the cars, didn't they? They were a little bit slow on their feet in a way that we kind of associate with the pre-Vasseur era. But actually, the last couple of years, they've seemed pretty sharp. But this felt like a little bit of a backward step. So is that just a slip, or do you think that's just what you're saying about the bedding in of the relationships and maybe the pressure building a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the latter there, with everything building. Obviously, the pressure to ask one driver to pull over to allow another driver through, that is a big element in Formula One. That is a big seismic shift in the driver pecking order. And I feel that had they made that call earlier and been stronger, then it would have caused ripples and potentially damaging the relationship further. So they're in this sort of situation of sort of damage limitation during their tough period, in the hope that they can make progress with the car, always looking forward to the next one. Of course, it happens to be a home race for them. They'll be looking to obviously do better this time around.
I think it's also brilliant that you're doing this in front of a set of Williams Hondas who, in the mid to late 80s, had their own issues with team orders and keeping their drivers in the right position. So very appropriate there from Ben at Williams, even though it's not a Ferrari. Well, let's talk about one of the new teams that's going to be coming in 2026. Cadillac sort of launched their F1 team in Miami. I mean, it was a logo. Does that count as a launch? It does these days, doesn't it? And they sort of openly discussed the idea of a Sergio Perez return. Sorry, I shouldn't really laugh while asking the question, because that implies what I think the answer to this next one should be, Jake, which is he the right man for the job?
I think he is. Let's scale this back a little bit, because obviously at Red Bull he struggled massively with the car as it was at the end of 2024, I suppose, and the way it developed in 2023 as well. So, and I'm going to give quite a diplomatic answer to this. He was such a good, midfield driver when he was at Racing Point, and actually he took the car far, to places that maybe it shouldn't have been. He was such a sort of driving force behind that team. He got his opportunity to go to Red Bull. It actually started off pretty well until, the first half of 2022. You'd have to say he had a pretty good run. Until the first half of 2023, actually. And then it all kind of seemed to go downhill just as the car got away from him. That was a bit of a chastening experience. You would think that going to Cadillac, they're not going to be chasing big results from the off. They're not going to be chasing, podiums, and points will even probably be a struggle just because of the tight turnaround that the team is going to need to get its act together. So why not Perez? He brings a bit of financial support. He brings know-how. He's been in this position before with a team that's kind of on the up. I think, as an option, he's one of the better ones out there for sure.
I'll tell you why not. Because what you want, surely, with a new operation like that is to have a benchmark so that you know where you're at. And I think that with Perez, there would always be, given the way he finished at Red Bull, there would always be a concern. Is he at the limit of the car? Is he a second off? Is he half second? Is he a couple of... Where is he? Whereas I think Valtteri Bottas would be my suggestion in that he's got all those things you've just said, basically, in terms of experience. But we also know he's pretty consistent and could do the job and would provide the benchmark.
Why not both?
Well, surely they'll bring in someone else. And Ben, what do you think? Who should Cadillac employ?
Yeah, I was very interested in that discussion because I was thinking Bottas myself. I think for me, the big thing is that Bottas has stayed relevant. Taking that reserve driver role at Mercedes means that he's still active. He's in the sim. He's getting run-outs in cars. He's still staying sharp. Whereas I think with Perez, the situation is that we don't know what he's doing. He's not been seen since he's left Red Bull. And of course, he's going to need to get up to speed and in shape in time for 2026. And I think that if I was, picking the team myself, if I had the choice between those two drivers, I think I agree with you, Kev, in the sense that Bottas offers that benchmark and a stick that you can measure your young driver against. That said, I do obviously take JBL's points about Perez, and the only other thing I would say is that since he's left Red Bull, it's not as if any other driver has performed any better than he was doing anyway, other than Max Verstappen, of course, which was the problem initially for everyone. So, I'm in two minds, but I think if I was to pick, it'd probably be Bottas.
Okay then, Stuart. So we've got 2 votes for Bottas, 1 for Perez for the Cadillac drive. Who are you giving it to? Or are you going to throw in another name?
Oh, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I'd go for Bottas, and for the same reasons as Ben. He's the stick by which drivers can be measured. I think maybe his peaks aren't quite as high as Perez's are, but he's more consistent. And you've kind of seen, to some extent, over the past few years, Perez going back to his old ways of sometimes being right in the game at a race and then at other races just being a bit invisible. And that was even before Red Bull fiddled the car so that only Max Verstappen could drive it.
Oh, we perhaps won't go down that route at this point. That's a whole different video and podcast, that is. But
Triggered.
Yeah. So Ben, we have to talk about Williams at their best weekend of the James Vowles era, I suppose, in Miami. You were speaking to him earlier today. So what have you got to say about that race in Miami and the Carlos Sainz anger on the radio at the end of the race?
Yeah, and I think that he made it clear that they had the debrief afterwards and everything was clear after a couple of minutes. And I think what we're seeing now is after the initial Alex Albon surge of points and sort of what James Vowles was saying was that the fact that he's really helpful in terms of helping Carlos Sainz develop together with this car. He's giving him tips, and he said that's most unusual for Formula One teams to have that relationship. Most drivers keep things back. They don't like to reveal where there's performance to be gained in a car, especially to a teammate. But Albon's played that crucial role, which has allowed Sainz to get up to speed quicker. And he was asked about Lewis Hamilton and the situation at Ferrari, and you could say that maybe that's what Ferrari's problems are, in the sense that the drivers, maybe they're not sharing as much information, and maybe Leclerc's holding some things back, which is preventing Hamilton from progressing with that car. Whereas in Williams, according to Vowles, the situation is that everything's all on the table, everything's open, and they're developing together as a team. Everything's harmonious, everything's moving in the right direction, and he's pretty happy coming into this European season.
Did he reveal any targets for 2025? Has he revised them now that they've got off to such a promising start?
No revising of targets. I think it's still, just to maximise, obviously, every weekend, but there's no targets on the table just yet.
Fair enough. I thought I'd try at least to prize that out of you, but no, fair enough. So, Jake, Imola will mark the debut of the softest C6 Pirelli tyre being used for the first time in F1 to try and sort of spice up the racing after, the Japanese Grand Prix, you could kind of admire the ability on show, but it wasn't a great sporting contest, as it were. So do we think it will make a difference to the racing, bear in mind what you've already said about overtaking being pretty tricky at Imola?
Well, I think when, and we're seeing this with Monaco this year, when you don't have an option to, let's say, make the race interesting, and it does sound a little bit contrived now that I say that to myself. If you don't have an opportunity to do that, then what can you do? Well, you can change the tyre compounds, and in theory, that should make the race a little bit more, let's say, spicy with regards to tyre strategy and mix things up a little bit, because I think what we saw in Suzuka was that we do not want just a absolute one-stopper and they're only stopping because they have to stop, because that just offers absolutely no latitude with regards to tyre strategy. Everybody pits at around the same time. Maybe you get one lap or two sort of overcut, undercut, but because the overcut or undercut is weak, you just don't see much strategic variation. So we've got the C6 now. So it'll be the first time I think that we've ever used this C5 as essentially a race tyre, which is going to be hugely interesting. Again, we've seen these, Pirellis last for quite a long time. This isn't, the days of 2011, 2012 anymore. They can last, but they do still have a drop-off. You still have to balance the degradation. And I think that should bring something. It might make it borderline 1-2 stop. It might give teams an opportunity to think, I do have enough pace to overtake with 2. I'm going to want to push 1 because I get track position. But, it could be the case that there is an opportunity to make the difference on a 2-stop strategy. And that's what we want. We want variation. We want teams to not just have their way of making it the shortest run to the finish anyway.
I do feel a bit sorry for Pirelli because if they make tyres that fall apart and create good racing, it's their tyres aren't good enough. And if they make tyres that last the whole race, that's boring because no one's overtaking. So I think they're on a bit of a hiding to nothing there. Well, given it's the 75th anniversary of that first World Championship race, we've got a bit of a fun question. Stuart, I'm going to ask you first. What's your favourite F1 race of all time? Putting you on the spot massively there.
Oh, it's quite tricky. I think in terms of tension...
We won't hold you to it.
In terms of tension, the only race that has left me sort of slightly shaking afterwards is Brazil 2008.
Oh, that does very well in polls for season finales and things, doesn't it? So I think a lot of
even
people
my
agree with
wife
that.
was excited by it, and she hates Formula One.
Well, there you go then. What about you, Ben? Have you got a favourite race?
You know what? It's quite difficult. I've got this terrible memory, but I would obviously say I think last year Hamilton's win at Silverstone probably for me was standout moment. I think all the emotion around that, and probably my first one, 2012 Australia. Those 2 races obviously stick in the memory for different reasons.
Fair
I've given
enough.
you 2 answers. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I got told off for doing honourable mentions when I used to do my first top 10, so I understand where you're coming from. But what about you, Jake? You've had longer to think about it now.
I was going to say, you probably know my answer, right?
No, go on. Well, is it from 1999?
Yes.
Is it the European Grand Prix?
Yes.
Or is it? Yes.
Good choice.
That is an amazing race. Yeah.
I
The Johnny Herbert win.
Yeah, Johnny Herbert win. Don't think I need to justify it. If anybody out there has means of watching it, go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is to be a fantastic idea for a series on our favourite races. Mine's 1990 Mexico, by the way. Prost winning from row 7, Mance around the outside of Berg at the Perotada. How can you not like that? And cars look great
Fabulous.
as well. Yeah, absolutely. And typically I've gone for the oldest option, so there we go. That's a surprise to literally no one. Right, well, thank you very much, gents. That will just about do for our Imola race preview. Be sure to keep up to date with all the action across the weekend on autosport.com. And we'll be back next week in a full review of the race, of course, and looking ahead to the blue ribbon event of the F1 calendar, the Monaco Grand Prix. Until then, thanks for watching.